Welcome to Talking Africa on Arise News, a special weekly edition of Africa Wrap, where we take time to reflect on the fortunes and affairs of the emerging continent within its own countries and across the world in an hour of conversation with African commentators, thought leaders and high achievers. Well, time now to welcome the Nigerian-Finnish writer, blogger and speaker and the founder of the multiple award-winning Pan-African feminist blog, MsAfropolitan, Minna Salami. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Minna, it's a real pleasure to have you here. Let's go back to the beginning. You were born in Finland and you grew up in Nigeria. What was it that inspired you to take up writing?
It was my experiences, my passion for reading, and my background, my upbringing, a whole variety of things. Writing is something that I've always very much enjoyed doing. It felt or it began to increasingly feel like my calling. And so I decided that I was going to leave behind me a career in marketing and focus on this calling of mine. But this decision was informed by a host of things.
Yes, and one of those things, as you mentioned earlier, was your background. Your father was Nigerian, your mother was Finnish. How did that influence you?
My multi-ethnic, multiracial, multi-religious also background influenced me in ways that I think I've been exposed to different cultures and a variety of experiences through my parents, but also the kinds of people that my parents were, which perhaps is not necessarily to do with their own ethnic background. But
so what kind of people were they? We're not probing too much.
No, absolutely not. They were and still are people who very much enjoy reading and also discussing the kinds of topics that I now discuss in my writing. It was almost unavoidable that I was going to become what I now say that I am, a Pan-African feminist. Both my parents, or my mother especially, I was raised around books to do with feminist topics. She's an avid reader, and her bookshelf was full of feminist books as well as African literature.
So very assertive parents then, and certainly not hesitant in declaring their sort of political positions and so on.
Well, funnily, I wouldn't say that they were very stridently political by any means, but a lot of the discussions that took place in our household, whether it was between my parents or friends and family, had to do with social transformation and political situations.
Now, you talked about being multi-religious. What does that mean?
Well, my dad is Muslim and my mother is Protestant Christian, not practicing per se, but I certainly was exposed to Christian doctrine and as well as Muslim doctrine.
Right. So you came from this extraordinary background where books were constantly being read and discussed and so on. Your mother, as you said, was quite feminist. And then you studied gender studies in London and African studies in Sweden. Was that what attracted you to gender, to study gender in sort of, particularly gender as it relates to Africa?
Well, actually, I studied political science in Sweden.
Right.
And then I worked for quite many years in between my political science studies and then gender studies. And during those years, I guess I was becoming increasingly aware of what it meant to be a woman and what it meant to be a woman of African heritage and how that intersected with political, cultural and social discussions. And
before you started your blog, which we'll obviously talk about in some detail in a short while, you had experiences in branding, marketing, project management. Tell us about that.
Well, yes. So after my studies in Sweden, I wanted to go off into the world, and I ended up in New York, which was, I guess, truly going off into
political science behind.
And in New York, I had to find work, and what I found was a role in marketing at a publisher's, and so began this career in marketing. So I that's how I ended up doing that. And then I came to London, and of course I had experience in marketing, and so I ended up continuing along the lines of that and became a project manager. I went and got a degree, a CIM diploma in marketing, so that I could have more background, educational background in what I was doing. Yes.
So of all these things that you've done, which is the most, which do you find most interesting?
Certainly what I do right now.
Right.
Yes, without a doubt. I'm very passionate about what I do. I feel lucky and blessed and privileged to be able to do it every day.
Okay, well, time now for another a very short break, but when we come back, we'll be talking to Minna Salami about her multiple award-winning Pan-African feminist blog, MsAfropolitan. Do stay with us.
The best way to predict the future is to create it. There's a special breed of achievers out there called tomorrow's people. They imagine what will be and strive to make it happen. They refuse to wait for the future. Tomorrow bends and conforms to their ideas. At Access Bank, we share the same sentiments. Our mantra for success is simple: speed, service, and security. Tomorrow's people own the future because they keep the world turning. That is the power of taking tomorrow.
Welcome back to Talking Africa here on Arise News. Let's continue the conversation with my guest, the Nigerian-Finnish writer, blogger and speaker, Minna Salami. Thank you very much indeed for sticking with us there. You are the founder of MsAfropolitan, a multiple award-winning Pan-African feminist blog. You've given us a bit of background, but tell us how you actually started that blog.
I started the blog as an interruption of sorts. So I was observing and reading and disseminating a lot of blogs online, and what I discovered was that most of the blogs that had to do with Africa were written from a male-dominant perspective, and blogs that were to do with feminism were written from a very Eurocentric perspective. And so MsAfropolitan was my intention to interrupt that conversation, and perhaps we can't even call it a conversation because it's more of a monologue going on between the very existing structures. And so that's how MsAfropolitan came about, and I had a lot of things to say on the myriad topics that I address, whether it was to do with African culture or society or Pan-Africanism and so on.
Why did you choose blogging in particular as the way to communicate your ideas?
Well, I chose blogging for MsAfropolitan because I had already been blogging for a number of years, about 3 or so years. I'd gone through about 4 blogs at the time, and I started off blogging random grouping of topics, and I was starting to get a loyal group of readers, and I discovered that the topics that I most enjoyed writing about were feminism in African contexts. Yeah.
So take us into that writing. Why were you inspired to write about feminism in the African context?
It is to do with my personal views, my personal interests, the worldview that I have, and the kinds of topics that I would read and write about, even if I did not run MsAfropolitan.
Was there something that you experienced in Africa, in Nigeria, for example, amongst the Yoruba people where your father comes from? I mean, the Yorubas are considered to be very sort of open-minded and quite broad in their sort of perspective as far as men, you know, women and so on are concerned. I mean, was there anything that particularly influenced your writing in that direction?
Yes, absolutely, and it still does till today. I think that I wanted to bring forth the complexities of women's roles in not only Yoruba society but in African society, and discussions that were taking place largely in fiction, African women's fiction writing or in academic writing, but I felt that there was a gap to fill in terms of the online space, which was growing very rapidly at the time that I started my blog. And I wanted to analyze and, in a sharp and witty way, bring forth this complexity of what it was to come from a culture that in many ways empowers women with a very rich history and cultural legacy, but which at the same time is tremendously and disturbingly patriarchal and dehumanizing for women.
Yes, because of course you find a lot of women sort of, you know, falling on the ground or something if a certain sort of, you know, person walked by or something like that. You know, it's promoted as a big sort of respect thing, but as you said, I mean, in a way, depending on how you look at it, I mean, it could look like it's sort of bringing women down a bit, doesn't it?
Well, I think something like kneeling down for whether it is an elder or a person of high ranking in society is not perhaps as gendered it's not an example of profound kind of gendering which exists because men would also
wouldn't kneel down.
They wouldn't. Well, they would bow.
Yeah.
But I think it's still that demonstration toward.
But what was the intention behind this kind of writing? I mean, were you trying to change people's attitudes, change the way they think?
I was wanting to share the way that I think, and predominantly the intention of doing that is to generate a dialogue, and of course, yes, to not only interrupt, as I mentioned earlier, but also to disrupt, because we are talking, when we talk about feminism, we are talking about challenging patriarchy and transforming the status quo, and that is at the forefront of my blog and my writing generally. If you like, that I'm trying to stir.
That's the word I was looking for.
Yes.
Now, tell me how you're causing that revolution. What topics? Just to give me an example of the sort of thing you'd write in your blog.
Well, okay, for example, and let me be clear that by revolution, because people have very set ideas of what a revolution is, and I'm thinking of the term in its truest sense. I'm wanting to get women and men who also believe in equality between the sexes, I'm wanting to evoke anger. And anger is one of the first emotions that needs to come before a revolution.
Well, clearly you're getting through because your comments appeared in leading papers, The Guardian, The Observer, The Independent, The Huffington Post. Why do you think your writing resonates so much with so many people?
I think my writing resonates because I am putting my finger on things that other people too may feel, but have not necessarily voiced. And I hope that it resonates because it is written in an entertaining way. I like to write in ways which are conversational, which is what I love about blogging, because it's an opportunity to. What I love about blogging, because it's an opportunity to just let your personality and your voice shine through. So.
But you're also something of a marketing machine, because I mean, for 2 years, as a compliment to the blog, you ran the MsAfropolitan boutique, which is an online shop selling a wide variety of products made by women of African heritage. Tell us about that.
So I launched the MsAfropolitan boutique actually as to honor the African Women's Decade from 2010 to 2020.
Not to make a profit, but just to purely honor the...
Okay, well, I didn't imagine that it was going to make me wealthy. I truly didn't. But I did think of it also as a way of monetizing my blog, because if I was the amount of time that I was putting into MsAfropolitan, I realized I also needed to start making some money off of it. But it
and
really,
you did make some money, didn't you?
I did make some money off of it, yeah, but it was also, I didn't make enough money to keep it going, which is why it lasted 2 years.
But when you're not writing yourself, you read. What do you read? What is it that influences and inspires you?
I read a broad variety of books. In the past years, I've been reading much more non-fiction than fiction, but I would still say that fiction writing is my favorite genre.
Who are some of your favorite writers?
Well, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
I was just going to say, that almost came to my lips. I love her writing. She's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
I absolutely love her writing. Yeah. I love Taye Selassie's book, Ghana Must Go. No Violet Bulawayo, my favorite author, if I had to pick one, which is a very difficult thing to do, is Toni Morrison, Alice Walker.
But they all seem to be, writers of a particular type.
Yes.
I mean, you don't sort of go beyond that. You don't have other international writers, British, sort of American.
I do.
I mean, Toni Morrison's American, but obviously an African American.
I do read a lot of African literature, but certainly I love to explore literature from all over the world.
But you also speak 5 languages. You've lived and worked in Nigeria, Sweden, Spain, New York, and London. Have you noticed a big difference in how your work is received in each of those countries?
No, I haven't. I think the reception has been similar in most regions, and I think that says something about how women's the struggle for equality is a global struggle. Yeah.
Well, time now for a quick break, but when we come back, we'll be talking to our guest about women in Africa. Stay with us.
Wherever and whatever your banking needs, Guarantee Trust Bank will be there, now and into the future. Because you're at the heart of everything we do. Guarantee Trust Bank, proudly African, truly international.
Welcome back to Talking Africa here on Arise News. We're joined by the Nigerian-Finnish writer, blogger and speaker, and the founder of the multiple award-winning Pan-African feminist blog, MsAfropolitan, Minna Salami. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us there. Now, the African Union theme this year was the year of women's empowerment and development towards Africa's Agenda 2063, a rather long sort of thing there. But how significant is this?
Well, I think it is a wonderful theme to have. It is important that the African Union has selected this particular theme this year, and I certainly do think that linking together empowerment and development has some usefulness. However, I find it somewhat problematic and worrying at the same time that this link is being made and that it is persistently being made. Empowerment has become very tied to development and predominantly to economic development. So you're constantly bombarded with slogans such as women's empowerment is smart economics. And my stance is that it isn't about economics only. And this is not just a view that I have simply for the sake of it, but actually what we have seen is that countries that are where economic growth is occurring are not necessarily securing equality for women. And I think that there is an urgent need to reconnect empowerment with feminism, because feminism is a language of political and social struggle, and the language of empowerment needs to be about social and political struggle and not strictly about economic development or smart economics as it
In that context, do you think African women are feeling more or less empowered in 2015?
I think that both, yes and no. Many women are feeling increasingly empowered. We have more rights. We are able to, speaking of economic development, to spend money more independently. Yet at the same time, study upon study shows that with every gain that is won, there is also a regression and a stronger determination to uphold the status quo by stakeholders whom it benefits.
And what are the hurdles that you see that are still there?
The greatest hurdle that we face is actually our mindsets. I think African women, like women elsewhere, but particularly African women, as we are the continent which faces the highest amount of gender inequality, we need to eradicate the obstacles in our minds and realize that change really comes from within.
And you obviously grew up in Nigeria and continue to go back to Nigeria quite a lot. Do you detect that it's changed a lot for women in that time? I mean, we see all these women who are ministers and, you know, top positions and so on. In fact, now I think they've just got a governor who's a woman. Do you see that as some sort of progress? Have things changed over time?
Well, that's an interesting example you raise, because a woman was supposedly won the governorship in Taraba State, but it was retracted, and her victory was taken away from her, and I think that's quite telling.
But that could happen to anybody, couldn't it? I mean, you get this, lots of people going to, you know, to tribunals and so on when elections are held. Many men have lost it as well. It's not because she's a woman; she just happened to be a woman.
I would argue that it is partly because she is a woman. I don't think that the Nigerian, that particular state or Nigeria in general, is at a place where female leadership is being embraced.
So why did they vote for her then?
Well, the people are quite possibly and actually obviously ready for that, but I think those people who are in power are not willing to let go of it and want to uphold a systemic structure where men have power over women.
And these are the places you see your revolution taking place?
Absolutely.
Right. Now, you've been listed as one of Applause Africa's 40 African change makers under 40. What would you most like to change if you could?
I would like us to start thinking about intellectual development as a concept. There's a huge focus on economic development in Africa, and important as that is, I would like the change, if I could choose one, would be a stronger focus on intellectual development.
Is that for women?
For women and men, for Africans generally. I think we're sitting on a rich culture, resource full of wisdoms that we are not quite tapping into, because we still believe that some of our history is primitive and backward, which the colonial narrative made us wrongly believe.
And you've also been named as one of Nokia's 50 remarkable women and listed as one of the top 100 most influential black people on digital and social media. What advice would you give to other women of African origin like yourself?
I would say to go ahead and express themselves, to realize that we are capable of doing whatever we want to, and to not allow social restrictions to hold them back from fulfilling their dreams.
What's your assessment of education in Nigeria?
I think we need to go back to the drawing board and as a nation, question these things and bring up to discussion what is the purpose of education. This is a question we should ask ourselves. And is it to regurgitate information that has really not taken us to where we need to be, or do we need to shake up the educational curriculum a little bit, which I think we do.
Now here you are, Minna, you've crisscrossed the globe, you've lived in many places, you have this successful blog, you're being listed as, one of the 50 most remarkable women, change makers under 40 and all that sort of thing. What else is there for you to achieve?
That's so much. You made it sound very glamorous. And
well, it is.
Perhaps it is, but I am only just starting. So there's much more to achieve.
Like what?
To reach wider audiences, to have wider discussions and dialogues with the very vast number of African change makers that are out there, to make sure that our stories are front, back, and center when it comes to shaping the discourse in Africa.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
My thanks to Minna Salami. Stay with us to meet this week's Talking Africa panel as we look back at the week that's been, the big stories, the big issues. We continue the conversation in London with our next guest right here after this short break.